ready?
Yeah, okay. Welcome, welcome. It's great to see such a great crowd today. This is phenomenal. Welcome to the Hoagy Carmichael room at the Archive of Traditional Music. What was it? Yesterday was the anniversary of Stardust being written? 2 days ago. Thank you. Yes. Well, we are in an opportune place then. This is our most recent Ethnomusicology Colloquium for the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology. I'm Dave McDonald, the chair of the department. Welcome to you all for showing up. We have an amazing talk planned today. And I want to, after the talk, remind everyone that there'll be a reception afterwards where you can have a chance to engage with our presenter and ask questions and develop. There'll be a Q&A session as well after this colloquium. Dr. Shonekan is a proud alumnus of our department, 2002. Mm-hmm. When she came by the department today, she was shocked that we weren't in our buildings at FES.
Heartbroken.
Heartbroken, in fact, that we had moved on from the old houses. But nevertheless, her dissertation made the move.
Yes.
We found her dissertation in our room 272 Dorson Library amongst all of our alumni dissertations there. Dr. Shonekan is currently Director of Black Studies at University of Missouri, as well as with affiliations in the School of Music and in Folklore. She comes to us today giving a talk, a very relevant and timely talk, on the American Anthem and the larger Colin Kaepernick controversies. Without further ado, can we welcome Dr. Stephanie Shonekan.
So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. This is really such a pleasure to come back home. I have fond memories of being here. I remember I was just telling Kennedy that the first time I presented in this room was in maybe 1998 when Portia Malsby made all the students whose papers had been accepted to SEM. She made us all do dry runs in this room. Fernando, I don't know if you were one of them, but so that's the first time I ever did a presentation in this room. So hopefully I still have some good mojo from that. And just want to quickly give a shout out to some of my beloved professors. I know Portia Malsby is not here, but she and Dr. Melanie Burnham, Dr. Ruth Stone, and Dr. Sutui were all instrumental in making me what I am as an ethnomusicologist, and of course all the really wonderful folklorists that are here. Also wanted to give a shout out to some of my fellow students. None of my classmates are here, but Fernando Orejuela is a dear friend, as is Daniel Reed. Both of them were still students when I was here. So I have fond memories of just interacting with the folks in folklore and ethnomusicology. So I'm happy to come home. I hope y'all are ready for this presentation. It is, as David said, and thank you to David for inviting me and for letting me come here and talk about this. So this is a topic that I've been really engaged in for a while, and so I know a lot of people are talking about it, but I'm hopefully going to take a little different angle. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. I look forward to a conversation afterwards. This affects all of us, whether we are black or white, whether we are Asian, whether we are biracial, whether we are international, men, women, and people. We should all be thinking about this. So the title is the American Anthem, an examination of the significance of the national anthem for African American identity and nationhood. Looking forward to an engagement afterwards. So a recent Gallup poll noted the approval ratings for the Trump administration. 50% of white folks approve of him, 17% Latinos approve of him, and only 5% of black folks approve. These numbers indicate an enduring, deep racial divide in the United States, one that we must face in order to reflect on the parts we play in perpetuating this or ignoring it. In this presentation, I ask us all to take a look in the mirror by first examining our individual and collective readings of three critical American signifiers: the national anthem and the flag as one is going to be part one. the image and idea of Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, and a lovely high school homecoming photo of some loved ones. Critical questions about race and racism cannot be answered comprehensively or constructively in the STEM fields or in the professional fields, where so many of our institutions spend their monetary capital. These questions can only be answered in the humanities, in history, social sciences, and fields like folklore and ethnomusicology. With an eye on that 50% approval rating from a certain demographic, I am suggesting that focusing only on the president or his administration, while necessary, is ultimately a distraction from the deep-seated and deep-seeded systemic problems that are still with us. Systemic racism sometimes sounds so lofty and ambiguous. While institutions and systems are certainly influenced by the historical constructs of race and practices of racism, it is people, uncles, aunts, grandparents, colleagues, friends, students, who tend those insidious seeds every day. The field of linguistics and the area of semiotics give us a valuable way to think about these images. Roland Barthes, in his reading of Ferdinand de Saussure, asks us to consider, quote, the rhetoric of the image, the signs and the significance of symbols, images, and words. So, what are these images telling us? What meanings might we derive? Because of the visceral and vicious reactions to at least the first two images I just showed you, another theory may be useful, the theory of indexicality, offered by Charles Peirce in 1897 to argue that signs and significance were not just mental or cerebral, but were attached to tangible, real-world things. Kent Grayson and Shulman explained that, quote, in contrast to Saussure's emphasis on locating a sign semiotically in relation to other signs, Peirce's model emphasizes the importance of locating a sign physically in relation to an objective, real, non-mental world. A world where real people live and interact and push for or against whatever they feel is right or comfortable. Social linguistic scholar Michael Silverstein expands on Peirce by suggesting the utility of semiotic sign arrows and indexical sign vehicles. In other words, what do these images tell us about our real world? What do they point to? Consider these two symbols. So, if we were talking about these two images maybe 5 years ago, we would be gushing with warmth and wonder about the Cosby Show, how it was a really wonderful picture of a middle-class African-American family. And of course, I mean, who could not love that other image, right? But the Cosby Scandal, the recent Cosby Scandal has changed everything about the warm and fuzzy the comedian we knew and loved as Dr. Huxtable. So when you see this now, it changes the indexes, right? Everything has changed. And a 2015 book on Gandhi called The South African Gandhi tells a chilling story of a deeply racist man who privileged East Indians over what he called Kafirs. For the purposes of this presentation, I will rest on what Charlton Melwain calls, quote, critical semiotics. In his study of how the Afro was used to convey fear in white voters, he explains that symbols communicate, quote, an effective, culturally bound message by invoking known associations among its readers and viewers, end of quote. I contend that there are at least two different groups of readers and viewers and varied meanings for the three symbols I present. So let's go to part one of the anthem and the flag. National anthems are created and performed as an embodiment of nationalist identity. Here is a funny but serious overview of how the anthem and the flag have been constructed as two-in-one here in the United States. So I'm going to play this little clip. How many of you watch Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt? Wonderful. So you guys already know know these characters. So this character, what's her name again? Anyway, funny lady. She is trying to push for some changes in the NFL, and she needs to get up there and have a conversation with them. So she needs to buy time. So here's the quick clip.
We just got group SMS. Wrapping up early, wash it, and be downstairs in 5.
5 minutes? I'll never make it up there in time.
Kenny's phone. If you're a cop, you have to tell me.
Flancy, I need you to sing the Star Spangled Banner right now and really milk it.
Is this a dream? Are there people in the room? I don't care. God bless America.
If there are no objections, this concludes.
The twilight last gleaming, whose broad stripes we don't have a flag. Bright stars fight o'er the ramparts we watch, were so gallantly like dreaming, and the rocket rain of them bursting in air. Was still there. Oh, say does that Star Spangled Banner yet wave for the land of the free and the
What's the single? Okay, what's that?
All right, so we laugh because, and it was shaking because I was laughing as I was recording it with my phone. We laugh because we recognize the significance of the connection between the flag and the anthem, and we know that there's such seriousness given to these symbols. Titles notwithstanding, Black people all over the world, for whom music is a potent expression of culture, tradition, and identity, have grappled with the ironies and conflicts of the concept of a national anthem, sometimes changing their anthems, as was the case with Nigeria in 1978, when 5 Nigerians of different ethnic groups wrote a new national anthem, which had previously been written by a British expatriate on the occasion of Nigeria's independence from Britain. The anthems of most African countries remain problematic because of the instrumental similarity to the colonial masters of their past. Here's a sample. So I'm going to give you guys a little test. I'd like you to tell me which one of these clips I'm about to play is European and which one is African. And these are both national anthems. All right, so one is African, one is European. So I'm going to play A, and then I'm going to play B. So here's A. Got that? Here's B. All right, so which is the African anthem? If you think it's A, let me see hands. Okay, if you think it's B, let me see hands. Okay, so those who said B, what clued you into it? Yeah, I mean, we are. I think somewhat we all are. So the right answer is A. That was the, but I'm right with you. I completely get you. That was the anthem of Zimbabwe, and the other one was the anthem of Belgium. And so, yes, so interesting that the first one is Zimbabwe. It sounds very European, first of all, and Zimbabwe has a long, troubled history with Europe, in contemporary modern times. So it's interesting that becomes the national song, right? So Africans are questioning these songs, and they should. This music that is supposed to signify independence, autonomy, and freedom, but sounds tightly harnessed to their colonial past. In the book Black Look, Bell Hooks discusses the need for what she calls an oppositional Black culture. And she quotes Senegalese filmmaker Sembène Ousmane, who said, quote, "For African people, Africans in the diaspora, it is pretty much the same. Colonialism means that we must always rethink everything," end of quote. In that same vein, African Americans have questioned an anthem that was written by Francis Scott Key, a slave owner and anti-abolitionist. He was inspired to write the poem when, during the War of 1812, the British bombarded Fort McHenry in Baltimore in 1814. As Mark Leepson explains in his biography, not only did Key own slaves, he also harbored a strong resentment of the abolitionist movement. He explains that the most humane thing Key did for Black people was to advocate that they be returned to Africa in a sort of colonization program. But even this can be seen as a deep sign of racism, as his organization issued a statement to the effect that the repatriation of freed slaves to Africa would help with the separation that was important to maintain between the races. Francis Scott Key considered African Americans as, quote, "a distinct and inferior race of people, which all experience proves to be the greatest evil that afflicts a community," end of quote. In fact, Christopher Wilson explains in the Smithsonian Magazine that, quote, "while Key was composing the line "o'er the land of the free," end of that line, it is likely that Black slaves were trying to reach British ships in Baltimore Harbor. They knew that they were far more likely to find freedom and liberty under the Union Jack than they were under the Star Spangled Banner, end of quote. Scott Key's third verse, reference to the death of the hireling and the slave, confirms his prejudice against these Black folks who were searching for freedom. Worth mentioning is that the first US president to recognize the Star Spangled Banner as a national song was Woodrow Wilson in 1916, a year after he screened Birth of a Nation at the White House. That film remains one of the most damaging and dangerous depictions of Black folks, so much so that it inspired a steep rise of the KKK and white supremacy across the country. The fact that the same president endorsed the anthem with these lines and the film leads us to questions about his own thoughts about race in America. These historical facts, the genesis and handling of the song, infuse racial undertones into the meanings that can be derived from this burdensome song. All of this factors into the choices that African Americans have made over the years. John Carlos and Tommy Smith spoke up with their fists at the Olympics in 1968. Tommy Smith wrote in his autobiography, quote, "I prayed that the next sound I would hear in the middle of the Star Spangled Banner would not be a gunshot, and prayed that the next thing I felt would not be the darkness of sudden death. My silent gesture was designed to speak volumes. As hard as I had worked to climb the victory stand, I had worked just as hard to earn the platform that the stand provided." And what's interesting about this image, which became an iconic image of the movement, is this man here, who maybe we'll get to talk about later. But here's Tommy Smith and here's John Carlos after the winning first and third in the 200-meter race. Interestingly enough, their gloves were donated by this third man, who's Australian. Other prominent African Americans have used their musical platforms to respond in what Shanna Redmond calls counter anthems in her book, Anthem, Social Movements and the Sound of Solidarity in the African Diaspora. "This is a historical impulse," she writes. "In contrast to standard European conceptions that anthems are supposed to engender performances of obedience and acquiescence to God and government, Black anthems are performative political acts." End of quote. She continues that collectively singing and listening was actually a method of participation within the freedom dreams and liberation projects of an emergent diaspora. So when Jimi Hendrix played his own version of the anthem at Woodstock in 1969, it caused quite a stir. But it could be seen in the light of what Redmond says as a method of rebellion, revolution, and future visions that disrupt and challenge the status quo and the systems of American power and domination. I'm sure most of you have heard it. Have most of you heard it? But I'm just going to play a little bit of it, just to remind us what Hendrix had done, and then we'll keep moving up the 20th century. So here's Jimi Hendrix. And of course, 1969, so we're in Vietnam at that point. And what this does, it gives us a sonic picture of what is happening there. A critic wrote of this performance, "At first, Hendrix's distortion-drenched rendition of the Star Spangled Banner was conventional enough. But right around the time someone singing along would be getting to O'er the Ramparts we watched, Hendrix began to slyly use the music's own martial bombast to reflect the violence carried out under this nation's flag," end of quote. But a rock critic, Grail Marcus, got to the core of the matter. He said it was more than just a depiction of war. He says, quote, "There's really no way to just characterize it as a protest against the war. It's certainly that, but he's also saying, I'm a citizen of this country too," end of quote. Janet Jackson did the same thing in 1989 with Rhythm Nation. The byline for the album, and when this came out, this was right after I'd graduated from undergrad, having a good time. and it came out. I just thought it was a dance album, right? But I didn't know even at that time what the byline meant, right? The byline for the album includes a reference to the year that Francis Scott Key wrote the poem in 1814. In the song Rhythm Nation, Jackson raises issues related to the state of African American life. Things are getting worse. We ought to make them better. It's time to give a damn. Let's work together. That's part of what the lyrics say. And then, as a historian recounting past protests and as a prophet looking towards the Kaepernicks of this generation, Janet Jackson proclaims in Rhythm Nation, quote, "Join voices in protest to social injustice. A generation full of courage, come forth with me. We are a part of the Rhythm Nation," end of quote. Another great example is neo-soul singer Jill Scott in her 2004 song, My Petition, where she laces lines from the Star Spangled Banner in with other lyrics that are written like a letter to America. So let me play that for you. It's a beautiful song. And she ends the song with, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early night." In this song, she says, "I want fresh food, clean water, air that I don't see. I want the feeling of being safe on my streets. I want my children to be smarter than me. I want to feel free." Here, Scott brilliantly references the food deserts that exist in urban areas, the pollution that affects poor people, police brutality and crime, as well as the deplorable state of the public school system that affects African Americans in high proportions. The song ends with the paradoxical, "Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early night." Redmond reminds us that the culture of counter-anthems in Black culture is not just about singing and performing, it is also about listening. So I've spent lots of time collecting lists of counter-anthems from a cross-section of African Americans. So I've been talking with students. Every time I have a new class, I collect a new list, and this is what some of those lists might look like. Let me see, I think I have a pointer. So if you, no, it works. So Kendrick Lamar gets mentioned many, many times. Here he is again. Here he is again. Right down there. Probably somewhere up here as well, To Pimp a Butterfly. So Kendrick Lamar, let me talk about that. One of the songs that is mentioned again and again is Kendrick Lamar's 2015 song from his album To Pimp a Butterfly, and the song is called All Right. A review in Pitchfork explained it is the anthem of determination and persistence. And my students agree that this is the anthem that sits well with them. So I'm going to play just a little bit of it for those of you who haven't heard it. And even if you have, it's such a great song. So here it is. All right. So for those of you who may have heard about what happened on the Mizzou campus, that's where I teach. And this is a song that was played regularly. If it wasn't played during times of rest, when the students were resting, they would be chanting this as they were walking around campus. And this happened in different cities around the country. Apparently, however, on Fox News, Geraldo Rivera complained that Lamar's lyrics had, quote, done more damage to young African Americans than racism in recent years. End of quote. This commentary is, to put it mildly, mind-blowing, but it takes us back to Shauna Redmond's idea of Black anthems. She says, listening to Black anthems is a political act in performance because it mobilizes communal engagements that speak to misrecognition, false histories, violence, and radical exclusion, end of quote. So what Geraldo should know then is that this anthem is not his. It belongs to those who understand and live in the space he is framing. However, all right, this anthem can serve to inform Geraldo if he truly listens. And this is something I've talked about quite regularly to friends, neighbors who say, well, you know, I've never had a Black friend, so I don't know what's happening. And I say, well, just listen to a little Kendrick and you will know everything you need to know. Or Stevie Wonder or Marvin Gaye, just listen, you know, it's all there. Perhaps the first and most enduring counter anthem is Lift Every Voice and Sing, also known as the Negro National Anthem. This song seems to fit a unique Black identity that is rooted in America. Written as a poem by James Weldon Johnson and set to music by his brother, J. Rosamond Johnson, in 1900, what the brothers called the Negro National Hymn was adopted by the NAACP as an anthem in 1919. In 2000, former NAACP president and longtime civil rights activist Julian Bond published an anthology of reflections on this anthem. One of these was a reflection by African-American historian John Hope Franklin, who cited the last lines of the song, "True to our God, true to our native land," as a reminder to Black folks that America is indeed their home. He wrote, this is John Hope Franklin, who is the grandfather of Black history. "Whenever I hear the words, I can hear James Weldon Johnson admonishing me to keep the faith." So I'm going to just play you a little piece. How many of you know the Negro National Anthem? Okay, not everybody. So I'm going to play just a little. It is a beautiful song, and a reminder that those last two lines, "true to our God, true to our native land," is what John Hope Franklin said of as the words that remind him to keep the faith. So because it is their native land, it is the native land of African Americans. So when Colin Kaepernick chooses to truly listen to the American National Anthem and reevaluate its legitimacy for Black folks in an era of Black Lives Matter, in an era of Tamir Rice, Mike Brown, Sandra Bland, Eric Garner, Philando Castile, and Trayvon Martin, he is keeping the faith. He is rethinking and responding, conducting a critical semiotic exercise that results in a gnawing question about citizenship and freedom. He is asking, what is the essence of equality and justice? Who is the we in the first line of the Star Spangled Banner? He said, quote, "I am not going to stand up to show pride in a flag for a country that oppresses Black people and people of color," end of quote. But after sitting through the anthem a couple of times and mindful of the need to honor the veterans, Kaepernick did another round of rethinking, and he decided to kneel instead, an act that symbolized both a call for social justice and racial equality on the one hand, and reverential honor for the veterans on the other. He is holding the only country he has up to the standards it espouses. So let's move to part 2 of Sons of Bitches, of Sons and Bitches. As we have learned in this country most recently, the act of kneeling as an index spurns another interpretation. This reaction is similar to Geraldo's visceral response to Kendrick Lamar. If we turn our attention to what these symbols of resistance mean to so many other Americans, how they interpret and react, we begin to get closer to the mirror. So I'm going to play something that we all heard, hopefully. Sorry. When the President of the United States makes this comment, we have to consider why he calls them sons of bitches. And we have to ask, who are the sons and who are the bitches? Is it anyone who questions the status quo, or is it just a few? I contend that for the president, it is not really about the anthem or the so-called disrespect to veterans. It is about these sons and these bitches and their brilliant, audacious interrogation of the national song and its origins. It is not just about Kaepernick or the NFL. For instance, at the 2016 Olympic Games, white shot putters Ryan Krauser and Joe Kovacs and black gymnast Gabby Douglas had their hands down during the national anthem. The white athletes were not questioned, but Gabby Douglas was so skewered that she had to issue a statement. According to Morgan Jenkins, quote, "Whiteness is considered to be intrinsically American. Therefore, a white athlete's allegiance to the flag is assumed, whereas with black athletes, it is more heavily enforced," end of quote. And yet the outrage from the president and the NFL goes against the grain of the law. In the 1943 Supreme Court case between the state of West Virginia and Barnett, a Jehovah's Witness family who instructed their children not to stand for the anthem and the flag on religious grounds, the children had been suspended from the school and the family sued. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of the family. In his decision, Justice Robert Jackson wrote, and these are really important messages that we should be looking at. He said, quote, "If there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein." Second point, those who begin coercive elimination of dissent soon find themselves exterminating dissenters. Again, this is from the Supreme Court. Third, one's right to life, liberty, and property, to free speech, a free press, freedom of worship and assembly, and other fundamental rights may not be submitted to vote. They depend on the outcome of no elections. And the last and most pertinent point to this discussion, a person gets from a symbol the meaning he puts into it. And what is one man's comfort and inspiration is another's jest and scorn. End of quote. So you read this from the Supreme Court and you listen to what the President of the United States says, and it should give us pause. In addition, Justices Hugo Black and William Douglas were compelled to change their minds from their previous views. They wrote, quote, a joint statement, "Love of country must spring from willing hearts and free minds. It can't be coerced and forced." Just 74 years later, oblivious to this ruling, apparently, the 45th president and his base continue to deride the critical commentary of Kaepernick and others. 2 weeks ago, the Michigan State Police Director posted this on Facebook. Her name is Christy Kibbe Etue, and she says, "We will not support millionaire ingrates who hate America and disrespect our armed forces and veterans. Who wins a football game has zero impact on our lives. Who fights for and defends our nation has every impact on our lives. We stand with the heroes, not with a bunch of rich, entitled, arrogant, ungrateful, anti-American degenerates." Signed, "We the People." I don't know who we the people are. But consider the words that she used, and this, again, is a police chief. She calls them degenerates. As a reminder, what does that mean? Having sunk to a condition below that which is normal to a type. And she also calls them ingrates, ungrateful, thankless. Ungrateful for what is what we should ask about. Ungrateful for what? They are doing their work, right? we've got to ask questions about what these reactions truly mean. Thinking of these black bodies, I am reminded of Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man and Wole Soyinka's Abiku, which he explains as a metaphor, a symbol for cyclic cruelty, cyclic evil, and also an expression for some of the enigma of existence, some of the insoluble aspects of existence. Abiku is a symbol also for unwished cyclic impositions. And Wole Soyinka, of course, is the Nobel laureate from Nigeria, part of the black world, whose ideas really fit with what we're thinking about and what Ralph Ellison and James Baldwin and Toni Morrison have written about. These frantic and fearful readings of black bodies have wide and real implications. Bell Hooks describes a character in Nell Larson's book, and she says, quote, "To love blackness is dangerous in a white supremacist culture. It's so threatening, it's so serious a breach in the fabric of the social order that death is the punishment." End of quote. Consider the testimonies of those who have killed black men in the last 3 years. Of Philando Castile, Officer Geronimo Yanez said, quote, "I was scared to death. I thought I was going to die. I had no choice." End of quote. Describing Mike Brown, Officer Darren Wilson said, quote, "He looked up at me and had the most intense, aggressive face. The only way I can describe it, it looked like a demon." End of quote. And there are more, but I'll just stop with those two. As if this is not enough, earlier this month, this was last month, the FBI named a new domestic terrorist group. They call them Black Identity Extremists. And just to read the news story, as white supremacists prepared to descend on Charlottesville, Virginia in August, the FBI warned about a new movement that was violent, growing, and racially motivated. Only it wasn't white supremacists, it was Black Identity Extremists. This move is reminiscent of the 1970s COINTELPRO program that targeted black activists like the now beloved Martin Luther King. Michael German, a former FBI agent, said that the use of terms like Black Identity Extremists is part of a long-standing FBI agent attempt to define a movement. He said, quote, "Basically, it's black people who scare them," end of quote. This reaction to black bodies is dangerous. It is what Bell Hooks calls the imperial gaze, the look that seeks to dominate, subjugate, and colonize. Part 3. All this talk of Francis Scott Key, the FBI, the Supreme Court, the President, may convince us that we are each and all far removed from the problem. But consider this last image. My son and his friends, can you believe that this is, I'll tell you in a minute, Sue. So you remember me when I was pregnant with him. My son and his friends posed for this photo 2 weeks ago during homecoming. They are all juniors in their predominantly white high school. Like other parents, I was excited and I posted this on Facebook, suspecting, fearing that I would get some interesting responses. True enough, the next morning I received a private Facebook message from a white friend asking why all the boys were black. "Why aren't there any white people in the photo?" she asked. And when I gently pushed back, reminding her of her own photo of only white kids, she dug in and said she could not be the first person to think this. Others were thinking it, she said, but were too scared to ask publicly. This made me really sad, because what this meant was that there is a degree of discomfort with the image of 8 black boys. The index of meaning applied to Kaepernick is connected to meaning applied to this photo. These black boys are not kneeling, they're not solemn, but they're still threatening. And Sue, can you guess? The one in the yellow, of course, the most brilliantly handsome. In conclusion, let's consider this quote from Bell Hooks. Unless we transform images of blackness, of black people, our ways of looking and our ways of being seen, we cannot make radical interventions that will fundamentally alter our situation. This struggle needs to include non-black allies as well, end of quote. And this quote is one of my favorites, because we have found that it will take some bravery from all of us. At Mizzou, we have worked hard to engage our entire community in this conversation. A group of students and faculty joined me in what we call Citizenship at Mizzou program. It's an initiative where we engage all incoming students, all of them, freshmen, transfer students, in a conversation about citizenship. And since they asked me to do it, I use music. So these students, you can tell who's a student and who's faculty, right? So the students are all in a band called Talking Drum, and we choose songs that are great American classics. I think I'm going to try and let you see what that looks like if there's time. Maybe we'll do some Q&A first. Our purpose is to raise awareness and enter the most serious conversations about how music can take us to the promised land. So we must all try in our research, our writing, our teaching, our learning, and in the everyday business of life. Only then will we live up to those lofty lyrics that christen us the land of the free and the home of the brave. Thank you.
We have time
For questions.
if there are any.
While you're doing that, I can see if I can pull up the, I'd love to show you what Talking Drum does.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm wondering about like your thoughts on like the IU semester on diversity when there's still like a lot of like racism in the classroom and on campus happening. Like, what do you think is a good, I don't know, balance for that?
So the IU, what on diversity?
Like they have a semester on diversity where they have like programming that like examines otherness,
Mhm.
not really that welcoming actually.
Wow. Mhm.
So I'm wondering what you think about like the hypocrisy of their programming.
Yeah, so I'm highly, I don't want to use the word critical because I'm part of it. I am thoughtful. I think we should all be really, really careful with diversity programs that we put out there. After the events at Mizzou, everybody was in pandemonium. What do we do? What do we do? So they went to Oklahoma, because Oklahoma had a case with the frat brothers singing a terrible song on a bus, and Oklahoma had come up with some kind of online program to teach diversity, and Mizzou went to go and buy it, very expensive. And we got wind of this, and we said, no, that's not going to work here. No, it's not going to work. Because Mizzou was a special place. IU is a special place. It needs a particular method to the issues. So for us, we said, let's at least start with this program. Because there were people who were saying, well, we teach you can get a multicultural certificate, but when we took a look at what people could take to get the certificate, one of the classes was the diversity of trees. So we thought, that probably is not a good one. So we've been pushing back, and this is a pushback from faculty. I mean, we all should be involved, faculty, students, staff, all of us who care about our campuses. And so we But when you push back, they give you the work. They're like, okay, then you do it. So, so this is one thing that I've been doing since 2016. So, what's your name? Amaris. Yeah. Are you a student or?
Yeah, I'm a student.
Okay. Undergrad?
Yeah.
Okay. So Amaris, you gotta find the allies, man. You gotta find your cohort, your allies on campus. That's what I did, was to find the people who care, and they don't all look like us. As Bell Hooks said, we need to find the people who care about our nation, who care about our campus, our classrooms, and we need to all like link arms and move forward. That's how the civil rights movement happened, and that's how we scaled some of those fences. There's great leadership among people of color, but there's great allyship there that's helpful and necessary. So I would encourage that, and great ideas come from everywhere. For example, this class was, first of all, I'm ashamed to say it was first called, it's not even a class, it's a program. It was called Diversity at Mizzou. And the first semester we did it, right, this is our diversity piece. The first semester I walked into a room full, an auditorium full of freshmen. All of these students come from small towns in rural Missouri or cities like Chicago and St. Louis. And they got there and they were like this. Because diversity is such a cumbersome word, and it has, again, critical semiotics, right? It means different things to different people. So a student who had to sit through this, said he came to my office, sat with me, said he thought it was a good attempt, but the name of it was terrible. And so he said, he became an ally. And he said, Dr. S, let's call it Citizenship at Mizzou, because that way the rural students understand it's for them too. The students from China understand that it's for them too. The students from cities know that they're welcome in this program too. So, so we changed it. The following semester, I came in and nobody had their arms folded. They come in and they see a band up on stage. They're like, okay, this might not be so bad after all. So I think we just have to get creative. We have to push back against the things that we've been doing every year that haven't worked, right? Maybe we need to tweak some of those things. Maybe we need to add new things. So, that's a long way of answering, but I feel you because I think we like to do the easiest things, and sometimes the easiest things get us nowhere. Yeah. You feeling me on that? Okay. Should I show you just a little piece of this? I hope it'll play. Let's just see.
Can you drag your window over to the right?
Okay, let's see. But if I do like a full screen. Oh, good. Okay, let's just see if it works. Maybe not. With my group. So I'm going to have them come up. So this is a group of students that have been in one or two of my classrooms over the past 5 years that I've been here at the University of Missouri. They have, I've had conversations with them as individuals and then as a group. We call ourselves talking drum because symbolically in West Africa, the talking drum is the instrument used to send messages and to communicate really important social discourse. So talking drum is going to help us think about this musically. When they put this thing in my lap, I was like, okay, we're going to do this with music. And they have always been with me on this journey, so I'm proud of them. And they will start us off with an old American classic. Now, as you hear this song, I want you to think about two things. One is that we're going to perform it using two different styles.
Okay, so you'll hear one style and then they're going to switch and do it in a different style. I want you to think about which style sits well or sits better with you. Which one resonates? Which one is more familiar, more comfortable? So that's one. And the second thing is that it's a big song that asks big questions. So we want to know what you think about these questions still being out there. Are these questions ideas that still need to be asked? Okay, so those are the two assignments, and I'll kick it over to Talking Drum.
How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? And how many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? And how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the How many years can a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? How many years can a man exist before he's allowed to be free? How many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? Oh yeah, you know the answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind.
That's our Frank Ocean right there. Okay, so we we talk about this song, as you all know, Bob Dylan. That it was written by Bob Dylan in '62. It was covered by Stevie Wonder in '66. And so, does it change anything that they're produced and offered to us in two different ways? And so we asked the students that, and the students are like, no. I asked them, do you like the first version, the Americana folk version, country, or do you like the soul country, the soul gospel R&B? And really, half the room likes the one, and half the room like the other. And then I say, well, what if I gave you a third choice, which is that you are willing to learn to appreciate both of them, and all the hands go up. And I tell them that's what we are here at a Research One institution to do, is to try and learn new things from areas that we are uncomfortable with. And then after we have that conversation, we then move to the conversation of these lyrics. What did they mean then, and what do they mean now? And I ask them, I put the lyrics up, I ask them to pick out the parts that really work. And so when we did this, I did a makeup session last week, right after SEM. On Sunday, I did a makeup session, and one of the students said, from the audience, so these are transfer or freshmen, said, it's interesting that we're talking about bombs and stuff in '62, and we're still talking about them now. So he brought up the North Korea thing. Another one said, the lyrics that stood out were the ones where it said, how many times will it take for us to not turn away from what is going on? And we talk about that in relation to what happened on our campus in 2015 and what has been happening across the country and across the world. So this is just a really quick snapshot of just something that we came up with. You know, I worked with students. You know, if it had been a biology professor who was given this task, he may have used like little types of germs and so on. I don't know what he would have used, but as an ethnomusicologist, I just really enjoy offering this to students who come having heard and read all the stuff in the papers and who are a little bit apprehensive about the kinds of engagement with diversity that we want them to have on our campus. So, other questions, comments? Yes. Yes, Kennedy. Thank you.
It's been awesome.
Thanks.
So I know you're writing the book with Dr. Regula, right?
I am.
I don't know
Hopefully
if
we
that's
have written the
secret.
book.
I don't know.
It's done.
But so I wanted to hear you talk a little bit, if you don't mind,
Mhm.
about semiotics and the indexicality
Mhm.
and how you talk about that in the books in relation to Black Lives Matter.
That's good. In the book, my chapter deals with what happened at Mizzou, and it really is a journey through the challenges that we faced and how the students used music. So some of these lists I'm pulling up are some of the lists I pulled from students as they were walking by or marching by or as they were sitting. And I actually, in that chapter, I don't talk much about semiotics. And as I was telling you earlier, indexicality just came to me as a fuller way of thinking about all of these things because I was having a conversation with a linguist, a friend who's an ally of Black Studies, who we were just shooting the breeze, and I was telling him about what I was thinking, and he said, Stephanie, you need to think about indexicality more than semiotics because it gives you a wider net. And so I don't talk about it much in the book, but the book is one. I'm glad that you've given me an opportunity, Kennedy, to talk about this book because Fernando and I just have been working for a long time and we know each other's hearts, and we were on a couple of panels in the last couple of years, and we included Allison, who's teaching right now, Langston, who's also, it's an Indiana book. And Portia Malsby writes the foreword for it, and all of us come from a tradition in this department and in this institute, a tradition that really takes folk music, folk art, popular music very seriously. And so our book is all about that. It's all about looking at what's happening in the Black Lives Matter movement and trying to pull out threads to the music, to the folk life, especially for Langston's piece, that allow us to really think about it. I love that the book is also accessible. For my friend who sent me that email, I'll send her the copy of the book, because I think that what we wanted to do was produce a scholarly piece, but also make it accessible for the students who were part of the movement, make it accessible to some of the people that Langston talked with, that Allison talked with, Fernando talked with. And so this is a book that we're excited about. It'll come out around this time next year. Thank you. Yes.
I just wanted to thank you so much for your thought-provoking talk.
Thank you.
But my question is about the Negro National Anthem.
Sure.
And those last two lines.
Yes.
And you had mentioned that it showed that African Americans were, how can I say, they are tied to the United States, their native land.
Yes.
But as an African American myself, I've always read those last two lines a little differently.
Good.
True to our God, true to our native land. And from my mind, that was Africa.
Huh.
So
Very
I've read it
interesting.
two ways.
Yes.
So I just wanted to share
Yes.
that.
Love that, because it reminds us, as Dr. Burnham always told us, that in Black music there is always this double entendre, right? So even as people were singing spirituals, they were sending different messages. And so interesting and wonderful that from this you take Africa, and from this John Hope Franklin takes this land. And they're both, I mean, we're double conscious, aren't we, right? So we can do that. That's perfectly fine. Love that. Thank you. Yes, Dr. Stone.
For your dissertation, you worked with Camilla Williams,
Mhm.
the opera singer, and on a memoir in that. Where do you place her in all of this? She certainly was of a different time, but where did she fit into this? If we could say Black Lives Matter, how
Absolutely.
did she respond to that?
Yeah, so she probably would not have liked the N-word, we gonna be all right. She'd have been like, Stephanie, that is terrible. But she was, you know, she was part of the civil rights movement as well. On the march at the march in Washington, she was asked to come up and sing one of the songs. I think she sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And so she was careful though. And I think that is a conversation that needs to happen too, about the different types of engagement with activism. When things happened at Mizzou, not every faculty wanted to sign a statement. You know, there were some who were not tenured yet, right? And so that was perfectly valid and perfectly fine. There were some students who did not want to march, didn't think that they could do that, were a little bit fearful of doing that. And then there was one guy who went on a hunger strike. Nobody else did. Like, no, brother, you go on that hunger strike. I'm gonna eat this Big Mac. But so I think that what I think of when I think of Camilla and this movement is that there were so many different kinds of responses, and each one of them is important and valid. She never had an afro, never. That's like, an afro is like not the thing that Camilla would ever have done. She always had the straight hair, and Camilla was asked many times in the 60s whether she would go ahead and put that afro on as Leontine Price did, and she said no, that's not her. She thinks it's not polished, and even when I did my research with her, she would always be really upset if I came in to her apartment in braids. So I would always, yeah, man, let's just shake our head on that one, right? But I understood that was her era, that was her personality, remembering that she grew up in the segregated South, and understanding that experience created a different kind of Black woman, a different kind of Black activist. So as much, and then she went to Africa, did 38 countries in Africa, more than any of us has done. I don't think there's anyone here that has been to as many countries as her. What it reminds me of, Dr. Stone, is that she is a representative of a certain kind of activism which should not be dismissed. I've met too many students who are like, Dr. S, if they're not with us, they're against us. I'm like, calm down, slow down. You know, there might be an article that grad student might write that will like open up a whole can of worms that will be influential in the movement. So even though he's not marching, he's doing something. And that's what it reminds me of. And the last thing I'll say about Camilla is that she always told me, when I'm stressed, just put your cares in a basket and just go put it at the foot of the cross, or whatever it is you worship or you believe in, and just leave it there, and everything is going to be all right. She also taught me about when and how to use the N-word and the Negro word and all of this. So I learned a lot from her as a young African at the time. Still young, but at the time I was younger, and she taught me a lot about African American life, particularly of a certain era, and it helped me understand that the minor I was getting in African American studies was even fuller for knowing her. Thank you. Yes, Dr. McDowell.
Getting back to the anthem, a piece of that story, as I recall, maybe it peaked a little ahead of Kaepernick when the Black artists were being accused of messing around stylistically. And I'm sure you thought about this. I wonder
Yes.
what you would have to say.
How many of you have watched the R. Kelly National Anthem in the boxing ring? I mean, talk about messing with the national anthem. R. Kelly, who is not a friend of mine, but R. Kelly really takes it to another level. I mean, he's got steppers in there. They're stepping. They're dancing. He is extending it again. You know, not because she's here, but Dr. Burnham gives us a way of thinking about how the aesthetics of black music are definitely seen in every black person's rendition of that song. And sometimes in my class, I'll compare Pat Boone to, let's say, a Marvin Gaye or Whitney Houston even, and use Dr. B's model as a way of helping them understand the manipulation of time, text, and pitch, right? That there's an extension and a compression depending on the community, on the audience, on the feel of it, and that's what happens. So I know that people don't like it when it's extended and so on. When I think it might be R. Kelly's version that's like 5 minutes long. Doesn't need to necessarily be on the page, but because he comes out of a black music aesthetic, it's perfectly fine. But yes, you're absolutely right. There have been pushbacks against that every time there's a singer. But then there's Roseanne Barr. Remember that one? Yes, Alicia.
Quick question. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Shonekan.
Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Back.
Thank you.
I had a question about word choice. Did I hear you say counter anthem?
Yes.
So I was curious about the idea of counter anthem, especially with regard to writings that challenge us to think about protest music or public music or collective black music making as largely about resistance. And so I wonder, is there some wiggle room in that terminology of counter anthem? Can it be anthem? Can it be Black National Anthem?
Right.
Concurrent anthem.
Right.
But does counter reinscribe this idea of
one being privileging one over the other?
Yeah.
Absolutely, 100%. I am there with you. Love that. That's what we should be thinking of. All, again, semiotics, right? All the word choices. And I use counter anthem because Shanna Redman uses it in her book, and that's such a great book. So I think we should put it in quotation marks, because what Dr. Jones says is absolutely right. If we're calling it counter anthems, it means that there is an anthem, and then there are these like counter anthems or counter narratives. It's like narratives, right? There's the narrative, and then there are these counter narratives, which will never get to the extent of narratives. Similar thought could be put to our curriculum, the ways in which we think about fields like even Black studies, African American studies, as sort of, on the side. I am the only ethnomusicologist who studies Black music in a school of music in Missouri. So I often feel counter, right? I'm always at the meetings like pushing the envelope a little bit, but at some point we want to all have the same envelope. Like we should all be moving towards that. So that's an excellent question that we should all be asking.
And if I may,
please.
I asked for that clarification or just your thoughts on alternative terminology, because growing up in Washington, D.C., we talk about this in our global pop class. If I go to a Howard homecoming game, we don't sing the Star Spangled Banner. We don't put our hand over our chest. We sing
this one,
lift every voice and sing.
Yes.
We are prompted to raise our fist or our Greek signs, and it has nothing to do with them over there or the other. It is about this very blackety black space,
right? And
loving blackness and heritage.
Yes.
So I just offer that as
no, thank you. That's perfectly good, wonderful. Hello, how are you? What's your name again?
Eric.
Yes.
I love your presentation.
Thank you.
It also made me think about Sebastian de la Cruz, the 11-year-old boy who was criticized because he sang the national anthem and he was brown, he was Mexican. Mexican-American, American Mexican of descent. It made me wonder, have you extended your research to look at how the national anthem is being negotiated with other people of color?
Great direction. And in fact, I think it might have been at AFS, but it was at AFS, and somebody came up to me and talked about the Puerto Rican anthem and how important it would be to look at that anthem, particularly recently, when we're sort of grappling with what it means to be a territory of the United States. So what that group thinks about the national anthem and how their own anthem features maybe as a Negro national anthem in the same way, maybe, I'm not sure, but that would be a great place to go next. I'm just not there.
It's a rich topic.
No, it's great. Thank you. Anything else? Sue, was your hand trying to go up somewhat?
I was just thinking of national anthems and about pasts and the different pasts that we remember, because I remember sitting with my father in front of the TV watching a baseball game or something like that, and Jose Luciano saying that.
Oh yes, that's also another thing.
All that
yes.
long ago, but longer than some people were alive. And I remember my father saying, "Wow, wasn't that great?" And
there was a lot of backlash for that one.
Yeah, and, of course, I disagree with my father, but the next morning, of course,
there was backlash.
Backlash. And I was also thinking of the Chinese national anthem, which I think some people would say sounds Western. Chinese people don't think it does. They just took over it.
Most Africans are perfectly fine with their anthems.
So there are different ways when you're talking about symbols and ascribing meaning to things. To tell, to go over and tell these Chinese people, hey, it's a colonized music.
Yeah. Where is their agency?
Colonized.
Okay. Turned it around, reclaimed it.
Well, it came from a famous movie in the 1930s. Chinese composer.
Cool.
It's composed long. So I just think about the flexibility and the multiple meanings that people are striving to talk about.
Yeah, but I think I do think that there are moments when we have been called on to, again, as Bell Hooks says, to kind of rethink. There's some Nigerians I talk to who are perfectly fine with an anthem written by a British woman for us. Yes, she was the girlfriend of the administrator, the British administrator at the time, who wrote this anthem that we used for 18 years. And there are people who were fine with it. But then there are, I think, questions have to be asked about what that means, particularly for Africans who are still at the brunt of Western powers in terms of the economies, in terms of aid, in terms of the meanings ascribed to what we do in our traditions that are signified in these anthems. Like if we question the anthem, then maybe we'll question some of these other things that are going on that keep us on the periphery of global power. But you're right, where is their agency if we
tell them they're wrong.
they tell them that they're wrong.
That they're wrong.
Yes.
There are just really complex issues involved in this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that but I think there's been inspiration historically of what's happened in the United States coming back to Africa and to other parts. Yeah. That will. Yeah. So Africans are talking about Colin Kaepernick. They are. Anything else?
There's not one last question. Okay. Well, great. At this point, I'd like to invite everyone to a reception out in the lobby out there. Dr. Shonekan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.